Okay, hey folks. So in this video, we're going to be covering literally every part of the British Isles as the title suggests. You read it. Now, I know my intros can be fairly insane and spastic sometimes, so we're going to get to our hot plates soon enough. Let's talk about the video. I'll take that advice into cooperation. So what do I mean by parts of the British Isles? I'm specifically not talking about counties or parishes. I'm talking about geographic and historical regions everyone has heard of before, at the very least, vaguely. So without further much ado about nothing, let's get into this video and become Angloids. And by the way, I don't want to hear about how inaccurate parts of the video are. I got 40 different variations of where Yorkshire's borders are, okay? Nobody knows. So prepare yourselves, because the fat, dumb, Yankee imperialist, fat, dumb, fat American is going to educate you about your country, and there's nothing you can do about it. So before we break it down bit by bit, let's go over the whole of the British Isles and talk about some geographic features. The British Isles are made up of two countries, the United Kingdom, the UK, and Ireland. They both have extensive histories and have their cultures tied together by fate of history, whether they want to admit it or not. However, on a regional level, they're incredibly distinct. Number 1, Ireland is 100% Celtic in nature and culture, body and soul. The UK is about 50-50 Celtic and Germanic, which we'll get into in a bit. Geography-wise, let's dive on in. So Ireland is one country, whereas the UK is made up of 4 mini-countries tied together: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, with 2 little parts called Crown dependencies that aren't part of any, the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. The British Isles have a population, in total, of 72 million, about the same as 2 Californias, in a land area the size of New Mexico or the Philippines. Specifically, the UK has 67 million, with its capital being London. Ireland has a population of only 5 million, with its capital being Dublin. What's interesting is that Ireland's population was at its highest in 1841, just before the Irish potato famine, at about 8 million people. It's never recovered. Both countries have contributed monumentally to world history, and especially to the culture of the modern world. Where would European history be without the British? Where would Boston be without the Irish? Where would Vietnam be without a Beatles soundtrack? So the geography of the British Isles is really a tale of chance. Looking at Europe, you can already see their most defining feature: their islands, by definition. The fact that they've been separated from the rest of the continent by water has saved the islands countless times, and was a driving factor behind the islands' cultures, languages, and societies. I remember meeting a guy from the UK who referred to himself as European, and everyone from the rest of Europe, regardless of where they are from, as, quote, those continentals. Anyways, the English Channel, a strait of the North Atlantic Ocean, is basically responsible for forging world history. There are also a multitude of small seas that have all been charted around the Isles, like the Irish Sea, North Sea, Dover Strait, Celtic Sea, St. George's Channel, and the North Channel, just to name a few. There are many well-known cities in the British Isles. How many do you know? London, Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, Liverpool, Edinburgh, Leicester, Dublin, Cork, Cardiff, Limerick, Bristol. Yes, I did just Wikipedia those. Topographically, the highest peak in the Isles is Ben Nevis in Scotland, but there's mountainous patches all over the place. Some rivers are also well known outside of the Isles, and we'll get into these more as the video progresses, but here's some for now: the Thames, Humber, Severn, and Shannon. So now, let's do a very general overview of the history of both the Isles. The British Isles used to be attached to mainland Europe tens of thousands of years ago because sea levels were lower, so more land was exposed, so basically, Big Europe. However, as the last ice age ended and the ice melted, the sea levels rose and flooded this land called Doggerland. People lived on Doggerland for thousands of years. It had its own rivers, mountains, civilizations, families, enemies, plants, animals, and resources. However, as the water sunk the land, it left behind the modern-day coastlines of Europe, and the modern-day British Isles are just Doggerland's highlands that were elevated enough to stay above water. The very earliest people to ever inhabit the new British Isles was Homo heidelbergensis 500,000 years ago, but they were replaced by Neanderthals who died out 40,000 years ago in Britain. Hunter-gatherers replaced them, then finally as the waters came in, the bell beaker culture came in from the mainland 4,400 years ago. Then the Celts invaded 2,800 years ago, the redheads with freckles, you know the ones, who interbred with the bell beakers to such an extent that the Celts took over. The British Isles are now full of Celtic tribes with little villages. The Romans first invade in 43 AD and begin their invasion of Britain, stopping at Scotland because the old-timey Scots were too ferocious. Ireland is basically untouched and watches all this, unaware they will be invaded in the future. Romans fled Britain around 400 AD as the empire collapsed. Now without protection, Britain was invaded by Germanic tribes from across the North Sea, specifically the Jutes, Saxons, and Angles. Almost like it's Angleland now, or England. This interbreeding created the Anglo-Saxons, who fought with each other around modern-day England with a new Celtic-Germanic culture, but the fringes of Britain were still totally Celtic, like Cornwall, Wales, Scotland, the Isle of Man, and all of Ireland. This is also when the Old English language began, well before even the these, thys, and thous. It's unintelligible to the English we speak and just sounded like German fantasy wizard gobbledygook. Then in the 800s, the Vikings invaded and made the Danelaw, a Viking territory in this part of northern England. By the way, this whole time, Ireland is a patchwork of different chieftains and tiny kingdoms bickering with each other, attempting to unify the island, but nope. England is now mainly Germanic. In 1066, the Normans invade from France under William the Conqueror, adding a new French influence in England. Add that culture to the list. They brought feudalism, peasantry, lords and castles to England, and hijacked the English language with a massive French influence, creating Middle English, kind of like what we speak, but severely more drunk and biblical. As the medieval age chugs on, we have the 100 Years' War with France, various invasions of Ireland by England, Wales is subdued, and England tries to bastardize the culture but fails, good job Wales. Scotland adopts medieval culture and gets kings and castles, and Christianity is now widely practiced everywhere. Ireland had long since adopted Catholicism since the fall of Rome, and the island of Britain was Catholic until they decided Protestantism was better. Speaking of which, in the 1500s, King Henry VIII is told he can't divorce his wife, so he becomes Protestant, specifically Anglican, but you Americans know the Anglicans by a better name, the Episcopalians. Then the Tudors come into power, discovery of the Americas, England and Scotland unify under one crown, uniting Britain and much of Ireland, the English Civil War, Cromwell wins then dies, Kingdom of Great Britain is formed in 1707, the Industrial Revolution begins, the UK is formed in 1801, the British Empire becomes gigantic and worldwide, both world wars, Irish independence, British Empire disappears, and now we're back at square one. Whew. Oh yeah, and Brexit. As of the start of 2024, the President of Ireland is Michael Higgins, and the Prime Minister of the UK is Rishi Sunak. So now that we're caught up to speed, let's take a peek at each country more specifically and dive into their geographies, histories, and figgy plim-plom bloobs. Ah, jolly old England. A merry little place. Well, I shouldn't say that, it's not that small. So England has echoed throughout the history of the world and pioneered Western civilization. Everyone knows a little about it, whether the nitty-gritty in its various kings, authors, and inventors, or just the London Eye and Bojo's vegan rolls. So England is located here within the UK and is arguably the main heart of the nation, along with the others. It has a population of 56 million and a size similar to Mississippi or Eritrea. So obviously the main language is English. I mean, it's in the name, but there are a few quirks. Number one, the UK, especially England, has different accents all over the place, so there truly isn't one English accent, but rather a London accent, Birmingham, Cockney, Yorkshire, Scouse, and tons of others. People's accents bounce up the Midlands in England, but you don't really need to know that to fake your way through a conversation. Interestingly, the region of Cornwall, this strip, doesn't just have their own accent, they have their own language. The Cornish language is actually a Celtic language like Irish, Scottish Gaelic, etc. However, it has only a handful of speakers and has undergone a great revival process since its last true native speaker, an old woman named Dolly Pentreath, died in 1777. Basically everyone in Cornwall speaks English, but their legacy of their Celtic non-English culture still lingers. Also in Cornwall, these are all not Celtic anymore, you can find the Isles of Scilly off the coast, a tiny collection of islands about 7 miles in size. There's also the island of Lundy off the coast, which has a few people living on it and was once captured by Moroccan pirates. South of England, suspended in the Channel, are the Channel Islands, and there's a ton of tiny ones, but the main ones are Jersey, Guernsey, Herm, Sark, and Alderney, but there's also these ones too. Remember, these are all very tiny, like a mile in size. You true crime fans will know Jersey from the Beast of Jersey, but we don't have to talk about him. These islands have their own individual swanky-looking languages too, take a peek. Moving over to southern England, formerly known as Wessex, we have a slightly warmer climate with some decent beaches, as well as far more people and the origin of England. Home to the Channel-side cities of Brighton, Portsmouth, Canterbury, and more, there's a lot to unpack here. There's also the Isle of Wight off the coast, one of the most haunted places on Earth and has a lot of lighthouses. The region of Kent in southeast England is the closest to mainland Europe, specifically 27 miles. This is where England's famous White Cliffs of Dover are at. Hope you brought your vandalism pen. No, don't be a douche. Also, this is where London is at, capital of the UK and one of the largest cities in the world. Not in Kent, but like near it. It's a bustling city of 9 million people centered around the River Thames, and inside the city is the Isle of Dogs and the City of London, a tiny portion of the larger city that's politically separate for some ancient reason. What's the difference? You decide. Moving north, we reach East Anglia, this bulbous part of eastern England. Surprisingly, it's less populated than you'd think, and provides context behind the sexes. Be mature. In England, you had the North people, South people, West people, and East people, or the folk, aka Norfolk, Suffolk, Wessex, and Essex. See? That's where those names come from. West of East Anglia are the Midlands, which, as the name suggests, are the Midlands. The Midlands are a mixture of flatlands and the Pennine Mountains, a chain of highlands that run up the spine of England vertically. The Midlands are home to cities like Birmingham, Coventry, Worcester, Nottingham, and more. In the west, near the border with Wales, there's the River Severn, one of Britain's great rivers. There's also this part of the Midlands in the east called the Fens, which historically were totally underwater and not on the map ever until an elaborate and monumental series of projects, woodworking, and damming drained the water out of the sea in the 1600s. Now there's land to be farmed and towns to be built. Now we're brought to northern England, also known as Northumbria. Northern England is a different place to the rest of England, being a strange mix of very Germanic culture from the east and very Celtic culture from the north. It's made up of Northumberland, Cumbria, and Yorkshire, famous for its terriers and puddings. Northern England isn't as well off as the south is and has a distantly growing culture, and there's always a debate as to where the north starts, but generally is defined as being north of the Humber River. Despite being more mountainous and culturally different, there's still tons of notable things from there, like the cities of Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, and Sheffield. It's also the home of the Beatles, the Yorkshire Dales. Cumbria is where Beatrix Potter set her books, the Lake District, which is where some of England's largest lakes are for some reason, and Yorkshire tea. They're also very regionalist online, and rightfully so. They aren't the South. It's also where the Vikings ruled in England for a century. Also in Yorkshire is the Strid, this dangerous creek in the woods that attracts tourists but is ridiculously deadly and hundreds of feet and full of lightning-fast water you can't get out of. That has nothing to do with this, I just thought it was a cool fact. It's a thalassophobe's nightmare. There's also the Moors, a beautiful national park full of alcoholic tourists and werewolves. So this is also the end of England, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Isle of Man again, not part of England, but a small island between Britain and Ireland in the Irish Sea. It speaks English, but it's largely a culturally Celtic place, with its small capital Douglas. They also have this other tiny island nearby called the Calf of Man, which I think is cute. The only thing I know about the Isle of Man is that they gave us the Bee Gees, but other than that, it's an interesting Celtic mix between the English and the Irish. To summarize English culture, well, it's difficult. England is home to some of the most recognizable historical figures, like William Shakespeare and his plays, Queen Lizzie II, Winston Churchill, who's secretly American, Oliver Cromwell, whose head got put on a spike, all of the Beatles, Father Mackenzie, Charles Darwin, and Isaac Newton, who invented gravity with his bare hands. Some famous places include the Tower of London, Stonehenge, Buckingham Palace, the Shard, and, I don't know, the Ribbon Lake Windermere. The main sports of England are, of course, soccer, cricket, and some rugby. The main symbols of the land are St. George's Cross, the Rose, not the English Rose, which I've recently learned is something else, the Barbary Lion, and of course the double-decker bus for all you Londoners, and, well, tea and crumpets. And now Wales. Moving over to our second part of the UK, we have Wales, which borders England to the west and is mainly split by the River Severn. Wales has a ridiculous amount of history behind it, ranging from King Arthur to Catherine Zeta-Jones. By the way, did you know that the border between Wales and England is called Offa's Dyke? What does that mean? Anyhow, Wales is about 8,000 miles in size, about the same size as New Jersey or Israel. It has a total population of 3.1 million, and most of the population speaks English due to 1,000 years of conquest by England. However, Celtic Welsh culture still hangs on, and 18% of the population can also speak Welsh, which is actually pretty good. Famously in Welsh, Wales calls itself Cymru. Maybe. The people are Cymru, the language is Cymraeg. It's a whole thing, I don't know how Welsh works. Speaking of which, the Welsh language is a real mess. Just take a look at these sentences. And my Welsh friends, I love the Welsh language, I'm just saying it's a little hard to speak. Again, remember that only 18% of Welshies speak this, but still, you can probably see why. So to the south of Wales is the Bristol Channel, whereas the native language calls it Môr Hafren. It's the estuary in the sea that leads to the River Severn, but whatever. Anyways, to its west is St. George's Channel in the Irish Sea, and to its even further west is Ireland. Also, I forgot to mention that their flag has a frickin' dragon on it, which is all sorts of awesome, and the dragon also has a little name, Draggoch, or the Dragon of Cadwallader. He also gets his own motto, Draggoch Diri Kishwin, meaning the red dragon will show the way. Do you see how I'm trying to hammer in the whole language thing here? So, some cities in Wales include the capital, Cardiff, Swansea to its west, Aberystwyth in the coastal center, and Bangor in the north. Cardiff takes the cake in Wales for where people live, but speaking of where people live, Wales is also divided up into historic counties. These aren't the modern-day divisions of Wales, but it gives you a good sense of their rich medieval heritage. There's Gwent, Glamorgan, Dyfed, Powys, Gwynedd, and Clwyd. And yes, those names are hard. Again, these are not the modern divisions, but they're kind of close to it. Not a division, but there's also the island of Anglesey in the north, fairly close to the mainland, but just not connected to it. Anglesey is famous for this town there that's called, that. But today the town is just a tourist trap. An impressively high 70% of Anglesey residents speak Welsh, which is a real white pill for the linguistics community, and Anglesey is also famous for Lemmy Kilmister and having answered the grey squirrel question. It was pretty grim. Geography-wise, Wales is pretty slick. The feature creature of Wales is Snowdonia National Park, or as they call it, Erie. Wales is more sparsely populated compared to the rest of Britain, but it's not without its beautiful sights. In fact, Snowdonia is one of the top reasons people go to Wales, because this vast expanse of highlands is not only the oldest natural park in Wales, but also full of quarries, streams, Roman forts, tiny pastures, and hilly woodlands, as well as all sorts of animal species like the otter, goat, red kite, and poisonous fungus. Complementing Snowdonia in the south of Wales is the mountainous national park Brecon Beacons, aka Banau Brycheiniog. It's like Snowdonia, but I still thought I should mention them. They are both fantastic fantasy settings. Also, while we're talking about fantasy, I found out about this ancient Celtic instrument called the carnix that was used in the Iron Age. It's this tall bronze trumpet that you held up and blew into that was shaped like a screaming animal or something. Imagine how terrifying that would be, hearing this weird devilish noise blowing from these things as a horde of screaming Celts charged you as a Roman soldier. I think you'd just die. So, to recap Welsh culture, some famous Welshies include Richard Burton, Roald Dahl, who in addition to The Chocolate Factory wrote erotica. Did you know that? H.P. Lovecraft, even though he won't admit it, Anthony Hopkins, King Arthur, and anyone named Llewellyn. The feature creatures of Wales are Snowdonia National Park, as I said before, but also Caernarfon Castle, Cardiff Castle, and quite frankly the whole island of Anglesey. The main sports are boxing, which is huge in Wales, rugby, and soccer, because why not? The usual suspects. The main symbols are their Welsh dragon, aka Y Drag Goch, leeks, yes, like the plant leeks, daffodils, and the Welsh harp, which I am told is somehow different from the other harps. Wait till Ireland hears about this. Oh folks, now we're on to Scotland now. I mean, where does a man start? Scotland is so rich in history and culture that it's hard to know where to begin. So the landmass of Scotland is north of England and northeast of Ireland, separated by the North Channel in its southwest and the North Sea to its east, and, well, the North Atlantic overall. One of the other elephants in the room is Scotland's weird-looking coastline, which looks silly on a map, but looks beautiful in real life. These are fjords of Scotland, but they don't call them that, they call them lochs. Scotland is 30,000 miles in land area, about the same size as South Carolina or Czechia. It has about 5.5 million people, and basically everyone just speaks Scottish English. However, about 1 million people also speak the Scots language, which is a sort of mix between English and Scottish Gaelic. It's really trippy. Unfortunately, linguistically, Scotland isn't in the same position as Wales. Although a third of the country speaks Scots, only 1% of the population can actually speak Scottish Gaelic, the true native Celtic tongue of the Scots, going back 1500 years. As with the others, Scottish Gaelic is a real trip. Take a look-see. Famously in Gaelic, Scotland is called Alba, which you may have heard of before. Geographically, most of Scotland is obviously located in the island of Britain, but is really islandy up north. Some Scottish islands include Arran, Islay, Mull, Skye, Lewis and Harris, Rothesay and Pomona, and the Shetland mainland. Speaking of which, these islands are in some pretty famous island clusters. Mainly, Harris and Lewis and the north and south Uist make up the Hebrides Islands, or in Scottish, Insagal. The Orkneys, or Arcabe, are off the northeast coast, and northeast of them in the middle of the sea are the Shetland Islands, or Shelten, famous for their ponies. What's nice about these places is that unlike mainland Scotland, household Gaelic culture is still fairly strong and concentrated. Also, Scotland has 3 teeny tiny rocks in the middle of the ocean that are too small to live on, but Evropa still claims them as her own, like Rockall, Hasselwood Rock, and Helen's Reef. I don't know how many Scottish people know about those, but whatever. Moving on, the people who live there. Scotland is also home to some famous cities. These include Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen, and Perth, almost all of which are now places in Australia. Most of the populated areas are centered in, well, the lower center, mainly centered around the little rivers of Tay and Clyde. Historically, way more people used to live in Scotland, especially in the rest of the Highlands, but they were ethnically cleansed in the Highland clearances in the 1700s and sent to the Appalachians, Australia, New Zealand, and eastern Canada. Speaking of the Highlands, most of Scotland is incredibly rugged and covered in highlands, creating some of the most well-known scenery of Scotland and inspiring thousands of artists, poets, kings, and conquerors. In the north of Scotland is Loch Ness, so now you finally know where it's at, specifically. As to where Nessie is, I couldn't tell you, you'd have to ask her yourself. Well, I don't know, maybe Nessie is a guy. You could be the first to check. The southern border of Scotland with England is Hadrian's Wall, built in 122 AD. And yes, I know the eastern end trails off a bit. Congratulations on passing Intro to World History. To give a review of Scottish culture, some historical Scots would be the inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, historian and novelist Walter Scott, famous poet Robert Burns, Sean Connery, Macbeth, William Wallace, and Mary Queen of Scots, and way more. Famous places are Edinburgh Castle, Stirling Castle, the Highlands, the fjords. I know they're lochs, but let's call a spade here. And let's be real, the Kelpies. Famous sports are golf, invented by the Scottish in the 1200s, the Highland Games, and rugby. Also, this should go without saying, but another famous marker of Scotland is the intensive rain. The weather isn't the greatest. The most well-known symbols of Scotland are the thistle, unicorn, the bagpipes, the tam o' shanter, kilts, haggis, and hogmanay, because the English love New Year's and the Scottish don't, because being a contrarian means you're Scottish. Well, folks, now we're on a different island. We've done the whole of Britain, and now we're on to the island of Ireland. We're still in the United Kingdom, but we've spilled onto a new landmass. Northern Ireland is a part of the UK north of the country of Ireland, and it's in a pretty contentious spot. First of all, much of Northern Ireland faces the Irish Sea, and it's also where the North Channel separates Scotland from Ireland. At its closest point, it's only 12.5 miles away. Much of the country, well, you know what I mean, has a much smoother, non-rugged coastline, but is more made up of little peninsulas and marshy inlets, which they call lochs. It's about 5,500 miles in land area, about the size of Connecticut or the Bahamas. The population is about 2 million, and basically everyone speaks English, of course, but the accent is a cool mix of English, Scottish, and Irish. Listen to Liam Neeson speak. So one of the peculiar things about Northern Ireland is that it's actually not as north as the real Ireland, which is 7 miles more north at its most extreme point. Basically, the name is a farce. Also, the reason Northern Ireland exists is because of this thing called the Ulster Plantation in the 1600s, which was basically when King James I of England sent a bunch of Scottish and Northern English people to colonize Northern Ireland, interbreed with the native Irish, and drive out Catholicism to make the place Protestant. This is why Northern Ireland is Protestant today, whereas the rest of Ireland is Catholic. More on this in another video. One of the other things I'll touch on again in the next section is that Ireland is split up into 4 regions. The 4 historic regions of Ireland are Munster, Connacht, Leinster, and Ulster in the north. Ulster is what Northern Ireland is called today because it more or less takes the shape of the historic region of the same name. At the center of Ulster is the largest lake in the British Isles, which is called Loch Neg, which, according to Irish legend, the giant Finn McCool grabbed a giant clump of soil out of the ground, which became the lake, and he tossed it into the sea, which became the Isle of Man. So what makes up Ulster today? Well, we can take a peek at the cities, which today are basically a cultural infusion of Irish and a broadly pan-British culture. Some of the cities include Belfast, the mini capital, Londonderry, or just Derry if you're patriotic, Newry, Armagh, and Lisburn, which today have been shaped by a past century of conflict, culture, and religion. Much of this relates to the Troubles, the time from 1968 to 1998, when Northern Ireland was basically in a sort of pseudo-civil war. In a politically neutral summary, the Protestants living there who wanted to stay loyal to the UK were called Loyalists, and the Catholics living there who wanted to unite with the rest of Ireland were called Republicans. They both formed their own little paramilitary forces too. The Royalists made the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Forces, and the Catholics made the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. For 3 decades, these two duked it out across the British Isles with different acts of domestic terrorism and led to these truly haunting photos, and the conflict didn't end until '98. The IRA didn't even disarm until 2005, and the UVF didn't until 2007, and to this day, it has created some real negative memories for the people of Northern Ireland. It's a real touchy subject for the people of the Isles to this day. To recap Northern Ireland, it's got a lot going for it. I know the Troubles took up a big part of this, but they're important in understanding why Northern Ireland is the way it is. Some notable figures from this region are C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, Van Morrison, a musician I'm not familiar with, Liam Neeson, who has a particular set of skills, Jerry Adams, I don't need to hear your opinions on the man, it's just a fact, George Best, one of the best soccer players of all time, hence the name, and Jamie Dornan, who is some guy who won a Golden Globe. Sorry, Jamie, I don't watch TV. It's not you, it's me. If you go to Northern Ireland, it'd behoove you to visit anywhere in Belfast, everyone's favorite city, the Giant's Causeway, Carrickfergus Castle, or the Dark Hedges, this cool Wizard 101 setting. Also, while you're in Belfast, you should check out the murals in the city, which were painted to commemorate those lost in the Troubles. Honestly, they're touching and shows the scars of the conflict and how the city is still divided today. The main sports of Northern Ireland are rugby, cricket, and Gaelic football, which is this bizarre but fun Celtic variety of volleyball but with your feet and also Hibernian. Finally, the main symbols of the +44 is the Ulster banner, famous for this hand, flax the plant, and the sessile oak. Well, now we're on to regular Ireland, a whole new country. So folks, we're on to our last part of the British Isles and the second and only country. Ireland is both the name of the island and the nation itself, and boy does it have a lot going for it. So let's do a bit of recap and not dilly-dally here. So obviously Ireland is its own country and hasn't been part of the UK since the 1920s. So Ireland faces the Irish Sea to its east, the Celtic Sea to its south, and the North Atlantic Ocean to its west. Interestingly, Ireland, also known as the Emerald Isle, can you guess why, has 2 different types of coastline. The east is far more smooth with little coves and bays here and there, whereas the west is very much jagged and more rocky, having a drastic change between peninsulas, inlets, and tiny islands. It more resembles the coast of Scotland, Brittany, or Newfoundland. Can you tell the difference? The population of Ireland is 5 million people, which used to be much higher before the potato famine, which we covered already in the beginning. The Republic of Ireland, in Irish, Poblacht na Éireann, is 27,000 square miles in land area. That's bigger than West Virginia and a little smaller than the UAE. Unlike the UK, which is mostly Anglican, Presbyterian, and a smattering of others, Ireland is 78% Catholic, and on top of that, even though basically everyone speaks Irish English, the native Irish language is actually doing fairly well. 2% of the population speaks Irish Gaelic, which sounds grim at first, but the tongue is in a healthy state right now. Ireland is made up of 4 historical regions, which I can't remember if we touched on this or not before. It's all kind of turning into a blur. We already covered Ulster, so let's move on to the others. Leinster is where a lot of Ireland's population is and contains the capital, Dublin. Their coat of arms has a lot of what's going on culturally in Ireland. Just reading off some of the counties in Leinster basically injects Irish culture into your bloodstream, like Kilkenny, Carlow, Meath, and Wexford. Anyways, moving on to Munster. It's the southern historical province of Ireland and home to delightfully named places like Clare, Kerry, and Tipperary. Today, Munster is famous for being home to a lot of tourism and Irish mythology, and I don't know, the Fae, but has also played a big role in connecting Ireland to the rest of Europe because of its prime ocean access. Last is Connacht, the western part of Ireland. Connacht has all sorts of silly named places like Mayo, Roscommon, and Sligo. Connacht has been home to a lot of holdouts of true Irish culture, like different High Kings, those who defended against the Normans, resisting the Angloids to their east, beating the Vikings a lot of the time, and also having a slightly higher proportion of Irish speakers. That being said, it's also the source of the River Shannon, which I should have brought up before. It's the main longest river of Ireland that runs vertically down Ireland's western side, separating Ulster and Leinster from Connacht and Munster. The Shannon separated a lot of Ireland historically, and you can see from a map that it's, like, weirdly wide. I want to be fair to Ireland because first of all, it's a magical place, but also, you'll never beat the Irish. Wolf tones. Here's a quick rundown of Irish history to get you into the mood. So the first Iroids were hunter-gatherers tens of thousands of years ago, but when the Celts arrived from Central Europe 3,500 years ago, they bred them out of existence and brought over red hair, fair skin, and freckles. So now the Celts and the Druids and the rest of the football team are just hanging out when the rest of Britain gets invaded by the Romans, except for the Picts, that is. Then that collapses and St. Patrick visits the Irish in 433 AD and brings over Catholicism, using the shamrock to explain the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So now Ireland is Catholic, but now in the 800s, the Vikings invade and make little Germanic outposts here and there, putting Ireland under Anglo-Norman control. They eventually leave, but the destruction in their wake paves the way for England to come in and steamroll them and steal their women. The Middle Ages is basically England slowly conquering and colonizing the island. The Shannon blocks them for a bit, but is no match. By the 1600s, England under the Tudors controls much of Ireland and enforces pro-English laws, colonization of Ulster, and speaking English, basically eradicating native Irish culture. Boy, I sure hope they won't repeat the same process in the Americas. By the time the Irish potato famine happens in 1845, aka genocide, most of Ireland was becoming rapidly British with only some stragglers in rural areas. However, the famine allows the Irish to go to different parts of the world and retain their culture. I hope they aren't persecuted there. World War I makes the Irish want independence, which is granted in 1921, but there's still work to do. They abolished the monarchy in 1949, but then the Troubles start in 68, and Ulster is subject to questioning. Then Ireland's economy explodes in the technology sector, and their quality of life skyrockets. Good job, Irish. The true culture slowly returns, and they join the EU in 1973, and abracadabra hocus pocus, we're in 2024. So what of Irish culture? Well, it varies a lot in comparison to those pesky Brits. Cities in Ireland include Cork, Galway, Dublin, Limerick, and Killarney. Some famous Irish peeps are James Joyce, famous novelist, W.B. Yeats, famous poet whose political views should definitely not be Googled and brought up to your high school English teacher, Bono, if you like U2, Oscar Wilde, if you're a libertine, Bram Stoker, if you want to get vampirical, St. Patrick, who wasn't born in Ireland, but come on, 1/8 of Biden, and Noel Gallagher if you stretch the definition. Some places to visit include Dublin to have a pint of Guinness, Killarney National Park, Clonmacnoise, the Rock of Cashel, and the Blarney Stone if you're willing to kiss something a million other people have. Also, bring an umbrella since Ireland is famous for its rain, which is why its pastures are so green. It's not called the Emerald Isle for nothing. Ireland's sports include Gaelic football, hurling, and horse racing, so if you like the Derby, you're good to go. Finally, Ireland's most famous symbols include, obviously, the shamrock, leprechauns, anything green or orange, the Celtic cross, the triskelion if you're into the whole new Celtic Brotherhood thingy, and also the Irish harp, be mature, which although I couldn't find out why there's a naked lady on it, I did find out that the harp is an actual object on display in Trinity College. So that's about it for Ireland. I hope I did these beautiful places justice and we can move on in peace. Well friends, that's about it. I can only hope you enjoyed this January video, and I did the people of these fair isles justice. I'm sorry if I missed any information, or bias, I don't know. I'm just the dumb fat Yankee. I promise it wasn't intentional. So for the upcoming videos, I'm gonna try and do something outside of Western culture, but I can't promise anything. I might do something for Easter, maybe not. I don't really know what to say for the outros anymore, except for I tried my best. It's hard to write these, you dig? Here's a fact. Britain drinks 100 million cups of tea a day, and Ireland never got the plague, so it was able to preserve European culture, art, and literature while the rest of Europe threw up and pooed everywhere. Thank you, Ireland. We owe our lives to you. Anyhows, that's be about it. I'll be seeing yous y'alls next times. Fechig me'er baloo.